How can one survive in an icy desert at -40 degrees without firewood or brick walls for protection? For years, historians and archaeologists have puzzled over how the indigenous peoples of North America created comfortable conditions in a place where modern humans would perish within a day. This is not just a story of survival, it is a story of incredible engineering that was centuries ahead of its time. We are used to thinking that warmth depends on the thickness of the walls and the power of the stove, but the inhabitants of the Great Plains proved the opposite. They used the laws of physics and aerodynamics so masterfully that their temporary dwellings were warmer than many stone houses of that era. They had to contend with icy winds descending from the Rocky Mountains, with only skins and dry grass at their disposal. The absence of forests across vast territories forced them to seek fuel where it seemed impossible to find any. Every element of their daily life, from footwear to the construction of the hearth, was part of a unified thermoregulation system honed by centuries of trial and error. Mistakes here cost lives, so there was simply no room for random decisions in their culture. These were technologies based on a deep understanding of the nature of heat and air movement, which we are only now beginning to rediscover. They turned snow into insulation and wind into a ventilation system that worked without electricity. You will see how simple materials in the hands of craftsmen were transformed into an insurmountable barrier against the deadly cold. We will examine details that are usually overlooked in history textbooks, but which were the basis of life for entire peoples. Are you ready to learn how the engineering solutions of the past can surprise even modern architects? Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how one small detail in the design of a dwelling allowed people to walk around inside in light clothing while a polar blizzard raged outside. What if I told you that the ideal shape for hurricane protection was invented long before wind tunnels existed? The teepee, the traditional dwelling of the nomadic peoples of the plains, is a cone, but this cone is not as simple as it seems at first glance. The structure is deliberately offset and has a slope that allows it to withstand the strongest winds of the open prairies. The back wall of the teepee was always made steeper and shorter to withstand the prevailing westerly winds. This asymmetry forced air currents to flow around the dwelling, pressing it to the ground rather than overturning it. Wind pressure was distributed across the surface without creating critical stress points that could tear the covering. The frame consisted of long poles, specially selected and treated for maximum smoothness. 3 or 4 main poles were tied together at the top, creating a rigid triangle on which the other elements rested. The covering was sewn from a multitude of bison hides, treated to become waterproof and translucent. This material retained heat well inside, but allowed enough light to pass through during the day. The entrance was always located on the east side, facing the rising sun and protected from prevailing winds. This allowed people to go outside without letting in cold air and snow. Particular attention was paid to how the covering was attached to the ground. It was either pressed down with stones or fixed with pegs. The tight fit of the edge to the ground prevented drafts at floor level, where people slept. At the top of the structure, there were special valves that regulated the draft and smoke outlet from the hearth. These valves were controlled by long poles from the outside, which allowed their position to be changed depending on the direction of the wind. This complex engineering system could be assembled and disassembled by several people in less than an hour. Mobility was the key to survival, but comfort was not sacrificed for speed. It was the cone shape that allowed the interior to be heated efficiently with a minimum amount of fuel. Warm air rose, creating circulation, but did not stagnate thanks to the adjustable opening. We would love to hear your opinion. What do you think about the sophisticated aerodynamics of ancient dwellings? Write about it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next analysis of historical technologies. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the thermos effect was created inside an ordinary skin tent? The most important detail that turned a summer tent into a warm winter dwelling was the inner lining, called the dew curtain. This canvas or fabric was attached to poles inside the teepee, starting from the ground and rising to human height. There was an air gap several centimeters wide between the outer covering of the teepee and this inner wall. This air acted as a powerful insulator, preventing direct contact between the cold outer layer and the living space. Cold air entering under the outer edge of the covering did not enter the dwelling, but rose up through this air corridor. This flow created a draft that helped to remove smoke through the upper opening. The inner curtain was pressed tightly to the ground, wrapped inside and covered with bedding and skins. This completely cut off drafts on the floor, creating an area of absolute calm and warmth. Thanks to this invention, the temperature inside the tipi could be tens of degrees higher than outside. The inhabitants could sit by the fire without outer clothing and feel comfortable even in severe frosts. The dewy curtain also protected against condensation that could drip from the ceiling when temperatures changed. Moisture settled on the outer layer or escaped with the warm air through the chimney. The height of the lining was calculated to cover the sleeping and resting area. All the heat from the central hearth was reflected off this inner wall and returned to the center. This double wall principle is used today in modern construction to create energy-efficient homes. Native Americans came to this solution empirically by observing the movement of air and smoke. Without this detail, survival in the winter steppe would have been impossible, as a single layer of skin would quickly freeze. It was a simple but ingenious technology that changed the climate inside a single dwelling. Did you know that modern windows use the same principle of an air gap to conserve heat? Want to know a secret that will change your idea of what can burn and give off heat? On the endless plains where there was not a single tree for hundreds of kilometers, the question of fuel was most acute. The solution was the dried waste products of bison, which covered the prairies in abundance. These patties, dried by the scorching sun and winds, turned into a solid, almost wood-like material. Women and children gathered them into huge piles in advance, creating reserves for the winter. Surprisingly, this fuel burned slowly and evenly, giving off a lot of heat. It was ideal for heating a small enclosed space, as it did not produce sparks that could damage the skins. The flame from this fuel was low, more like smoldering coals, which was safe inside the dwelling. It produced a specific but not acrid smoke that quickly went up the chimney. In addition, this type of fuel was used for cooking, as it provided a stable temperature for a long time. On such a fire, it was possible to simmer meat or cook soups without constantly adding new portions. Gathering this resource was an important part of the tribe's economic cycle before the onset of cold weather. Supplies were stored directly inside the tipi at the entrance or in special shelters outside to keep them dry. In the absence of bison fuel, dense bundles of twisted dry grass were also used. The grass was tied into tight knots, which burned longer than loose hay, providing short-term heat. Sometimes they managed to find driftwood, dried trees washed ashore by the river during floods. Such wood was saved for special occasions or for building a strong fire during severe frosts. But it was bison chips that were the basis of energy security for the peoples of the Great Plains. This is an example of absolute adaptation to an environment where every resource was used to its fullest. Without this unobvious source of energy, wintering in the open steppe would have been doomed to failure. If you like learning about such unusual solutions, please like this video. What if I told you that choosing the right location for a camp was more important than the thickness of the walls? It may seem strange, but it was often geography that determined whether a tribe would survive until spring. Indigenous peoples never set up winter camps in the open steppe, where the wind encountered no obstacles. In open spaces, the icy wind would blow away all the heat in a matter of minutes. Therefore, people sought out deep river valleys, carved into the landscape and hidden from prying eyes. High riverbanks and canyons served as natural walls, protecting against the piercing winds. When the wind swept overhead, relative calm remained below. The temperature difference between the valley below and the windy plateau above could be significant. Sometimes this difference was 10 degrees or more, which was critical for survival. The earth itself became the main protection from the deadly cold. In such lowlands, sparse groves of poplar or willow trees often grew, providing not only protection, but also resources. The trees slowed the movement of air slightly, creating a milder microclimate. In addition, the bark of certain types of poplar served as excellent winter feed for horses when the grass was hidden under the snow. Even simple shrubs could serve as windbreaks, reducing the speed of air currents around the camp. This allowed them to save precious fuel for fires. The camp was always oriented so that the terrain could be used as a shield against the prevailing winter winds. Entrances to dwellings were usually facing east, so that the morning sun would warm the entrance first thing in the morning. Western and northern winds were thus broken up by natural barriers or the rear walls of dwellings. The ability to read the landscape and predict the movement of air masses was a vital skill. A mistake in the orientation of the camp could cost the entire tribe its health. Proximity to water was critically important, but building dwellings at the very edge of the ice was dangerous due to dampness. Cold air is heavier than warm air and tends to flow downwards, accumulating at the very surface of the frozen river. In addition, there was always the risk of unexpected rising water or ice movement. Therefore, terraces slightly above the river level were chosen, where it was drier but still windless. It was a happy medium between access to water and comfort. The low-lying location also made the camp invisible to enemies from afar, which significantly increased safety. In harsh winters, raids were less frequent, but they could not be completely ruled out. The smoke from the fires dispersed in the valley, clinging to the branches of trees, and did not rise in a tall, telltale column above the horizon. Stealth was the second most important task after protection from the cold. The ability to disappear into the landscape saved many lives. Winter camps were often used by the same tribes year after year. People knew every bend in the river and every shelter in their area. These were proven places where the microclimate guaranteed survival during the harshest months. Often such places became sacred, as they gave life to generation after generation. Returning to a winter camp was perceived as returning home. In the wooded areas of the east, the principle was similar, but with an adjustment for vegetation. They looked for dense stands of coniferous trees. Spruce and pine trees, with their dense evergreen branches, blocked snow and wind much better than bare deciduous forests. Inside a dense spruce forest, it was always quieter and warmer than on the edge of the forest. The tree crowns created a kind of roof that kept the heat close to the ground. It was natural insulation, provided by the forest itself. In addition, deep valleys and dense forests attracted not only people, but also animals. Deer and moose also sought shelter from the wind by descending into the same lowlands. This meant that food was often found in close proximity to the camp. Hunters did not have to go far, wasting energy fighting deep snow. Thus, nature itself brought prey to man. Geography literally dictated the conditions for survival, and people obeyed its laws unquestioningly. Attempting to argue with the landscape or ignore the direction of the wind led to death. They did not fight nature, but used its features for their protection. Every hill and every ravine had its own significance in this system. Knowledge of the terrain was a map for survival, passed down from generation to generation. In the next chapter, you will learn how snow, which we consider a source of cold, became the main source of warmth. Heavy snowfalls in the north and on the plains were not seen as a disaster, but as an opportunity to insulate homes. It sounds paradoxical to modern people, but snow is one of the best natural insulators. It has excellent thermal insulation properties due to the air trapped between the ice crystals. In essence, a layer of fluffy snow works just like a down comforter. The main thing was to know how to use this property correctly. The inhabitants deliberately piled high snowdrifts around the base of their dwellings on the outside. To do this, they used wide shovels made from the bones of large animals, or even simple snowshoes. This snow wall closed the smallest gaps through which drafts could penetrate. It created an additional barrier to the cold at ground level, where people usually sleep. The thicker the wall, the warmer it was inside. In subarctic regions, such as the territories of the Cree and Athabascans, snow was used even more actively and inventively. Temporary shelters could be completely covered with snow, turning into something like a den. In such structures, the temperature could remain around zero, even if it was 40 degrees below zero outside. This allowed people to take off their heavy outer clothing and rest in relative comfort. Snow became not an enemy, but an ally. Sometimes full-fledged walls of compacted snow or ice blocks were erected around the camp to protect it from the wind. This created a sheltered courtyard where people could go about their business without fear of frostbite. Inside this perimeter, the wind died down and the temperature felt much higher. Women could cook or process skins while sheltered by the snow fence. This expanded the usable space of the camp. However, snow inside the dwelling could become a problem if it began to melt from body heat or the hearth. Therefore, it was trampled down to a solid state and then covered with a thick layer of fir branches. This multi-layered cake of snow and fir branches served as excellent insulation from the frozen ground. The branches created an air gap and prevented the skins on which people slept from getting wet. Dryness was the key to health and life. Snow was also used as the main source of water, eliminating the need to chop thick ice on the river. This saved a lot of time and effort, especially in the middle of winter when the ice was particularly strong. Clean snow was collected far from the camp, where it was not contaminated by smoke and household waste. It was melted in cauldrons over a fire, turning it into drinking water. Eating snow in its dry form was avoided, as it cooled the body from the inside. The ability to work with snow required a deep understanding of its structure and condition. Hunters knew which snow was suitable for building walls and which was only suitable for obtaining water. Dense, wind-packed snow was cut into sturdy blocks for building barriers. Loose, freshly fallen snow was used to fill gaps and insulate the bottom of dwellings. A mistake in the choice of material could lead to the collapse of the shelter. Even during short stops along the way, hunters could quickly dig a hole in a snowdrift. This was an emergency survival skill that every man in the tribe knew. Covered with a skin in such a snow pit, a person could survive the night without a fire, retaining their own body heat. The heat emanating from the person was retained in the small space of the snow cave. This was a lifesaver when it was impossible to build a fire due to a blizzard. For northern tribes, snow was as natural a material as wood was for forest dwellers or stone was for mountain dwellers. It was free, available everywhere in unlimited quantities, and had unique physical properties. People were not afraid of snow. They knew how to interact with it and bend it to their needs. Their entire culture was adapted to life in the white silence. Nature provided the cold, but it also provided a means of protection from it, lying right underfoot. What if I told you that the right footwear was more important than a warm fur coat? If your feet froze, you lost the ability to move and find food, which in the wild meant certain death. Native Americans understood this perfectly and developed a complex, multi-layered clothing system that worked on the principle of a thermos. The main secret and foundation of this wardrobe was footwear, soft leather moccasins. They were specially sewn with a large allowance in size so that they fit loosely on the foot and did not interfere with blood circulation. A thick layer of dry, soft grass or moss was placed inside these loose moccasins. This plant-based insulation created an air cushion around the foot, retaining precious heat. In addition, dry grass excellently absorbed excess moisture, which inevitably accumulated when walking. This was critically important as wet feet freeze instantly in the cold. Such a natural sock was much more effective than the knitted wool of Europeans. The most ingenious thing about this system was its simplicity and hygiene. If the grass bedding got wet or matted, it was simply thrown away onto the snow. The person would immediately fill the moccasin with a new bunch of dry grass, which was always abundant in the steppe. This solution prevented frostbite and the development of fungal diseases even in the most severe frosts. European boots of that time, once wet, remained damp until the end of the day. Clothing for the body was sewn from high-quality skins with thick fur. At the same time, such skins were always worn with the pile inside, against the body, for better heat retention. This created a microclimate directly on the surface of the skin. Warm air was trapped between thousands of fur hairs, creating an insulating layer that prevented the body from cooling down. The leather side on the outside served as protection from wind and snow. Outer garments, such as heavy buffalo skin capes, were worn over lighter deerskin shirts. This layering made it easy to regulate body temperature during active movement or work. If a hunter got hot during a chase, he could take off his outer cape to avoid sweating. Sweat in the cold was a deadly enemy, as wet clothing instantly lost its warming properties. Particular attention was paid to protecting the limbs, which freeze first. The sleeves of the shirts were made very long so that the hands could be completely hidden inside them. Special fur mittens made from beaver or otter skins were also used. These mittens were often attached to a sturdy leather cord that was thrown over the neck and shoulders. This design ensured that the mittens could not be accidentally dropped and lost in deep snow. For sleeping, they used huge warm skins in which they wrapped themselves completely, often several people at once. Inside the teepee, the temperature dropped quite low at night, so keeping warm while sleeping was the #1 priority. Sleeping together was the absolute norm and a necessity, as people's bodies warmed each other better than any fire. Children and the elderly were always placed in the middle, where it was warmest. Leather clothing was also specially treated to increase its resistance to the weather. It was impregnated with animal fat and smoked in thick campfire smoke. This procedure made the leather dark and partially waterproof, which was a lifesaver during thaws. This was important in wet snow or freezing rain, so that the skin would not get soaked through and then stiffen in the cold, turning into an icy shell. Making and repairing clothes was a never-ending process that fell on the shoulders of women. Mothers and grandmothers constantly monitored the condition of items, immediately repairing the slightest tears and scuffs. Animal sinew was used for sewing, which swelled when wet and tightly plugged the holes made by the needle. A hole in clothing in 40-degree frost could cause serious illness or even loss of a limb. This clothing system was so effective and well thought out that early European explorers and trappers often adopted it. They quickly realized that their woolen uniforms and tight boots were not suitable for life on the prairies. By wearing moccasins and fur parkas, they acknowledged the superiority of local technologies. Survival depended on the ability to adapt and learn from those who had lived there for centuries. Why do you think natural materials often cope with the cold better than the synthetics? Survival in the cold required not only external warmth, but also powerful internal combustion. Even the warmest clothing will not save you if your body stops producing heat. In winter, the human body works like a furnace that needs constant, high-quality fuel. In the cold, the human body expends a tremendous amount of calories just to maintain normal body temperature. Indigenous peoples intuitively understood this physiological need long before the advent of dietetics. They knew that in winter, light plant-based food would not provide enough energy for life and hunting. Therefore, with the onset of cold weather, tribes switched to a special high-calorie diet rich in fats. Fatty foods take longer to digest and provide a long-lasting supply of energy, warming a person from the inside for many hours. The main winter food and a real miracle of food engineering was pemmican. It was a concentrate of energy and nutrients that could save lives during long journeys. To make it, bison meat was dried in the sun or over a fire and ground with stones until it was almost powdery. This meat flour was then mixed with hot melted fat in a 1-to-1 ratio. Fat was a key component, providing the energy needed to warm the body from within. Without fat, protein poisoning could kill a person, even if they had plenty of lean meat. Dried berries such as bird cherry or irga were often added to pemmican for flavor and vitamins. The berries helped fight scurvy and made the fatty mass more palatable. This product had unique storage and transportation properties. Pemmican could be stored for years without spoiling in thick leather bags, sealed with a layer of fat on top. It was incredibly compact and lightweight compared to fresh meat, which was important for nomadic life. In addition, it did not require cooking. It could be eaten on the go by breaking off pieces. The nutritional value of this concentrate was simply astonishing by modern standards. A small piece of pemmican, about the size of a palm, provided a feeling of satiety for half a day of hard physical work. It began to work very quickly, accelerating blood flow and warming better than hot tea. It was the ideal dry ration for hunters and warriors on long winter raids when it was impossible to build a fire. In winter, they also tried to make the most of the bone marrow of the animals they hunted. They would crack the bones of bison and deer with heavy stones to get at this nutritious substance. It was a real delicacy, incredibly rich in fats and rare trace elements. Eating bone marrow strengthened the immune system and helped the body resist disease during the harshest months. When it was possible to build a fire, hot meat broths became a regular part of the diet. Hot stones were thrown into leather or wooden vessels with water and meat, bringing the liquid to a boil. Liquid hot food was quickly absorbed, restored water balance, and instantly raised the body temperature of a frozen person. Dehydration in the cold came on imperceptibly, and broth solved this problem. Food supplies were methodically prepared throughout the warm season, so that in winter they would not have to depend on luck in hunting. Hunting could be unsuccessful due to weather or animal migration, and then the supplies came into play. Dried meat, pumpkin, and grain were stored in special storage pits by tribes that practiced agriculture. These hiding places were so skillfully camouflaged that it was impossible for outsiders to find them. Proper nutrition was as important a part of protection from the cold as warm clothing or reliable shelter. A hungry person began to freeze much faster. Their reaction slowed down, and their will to live weakened. Therefore, food distribution in the tribe was strict and fair, so that everyone got their share of fat. Leaders made sure that widows and orphans were not left without food. Cooking here was not an art of taste, but a science of survival and energy efficiency. Fire inside the dwelling required special treatment and construction to be effective and safe. Building a fire in an enclosed space made of flammable materials is an art in itself. The hearth was always located strictly in the center of the teepee, directly under the smoke hole at the top of the cone. A neat depression was dug in the ground for it so that the burning coals would not scatter on the floor and set the bedding on fire. This depression created a natural bowl that kept the heat in one place. The fire pit was often lined with specially selected river stones, which served as important heat accumulators. The stones were heated by the open fire and continued to give off gentle heat long after the flames had died down. This worked on the principle of a modern heating battery, warming the air throughout the night. The choice of stones was important, as some types of rock could burst from the heat, so only proven boulders were used. This stone edging also served as a convenient stand for skewers or grills. Sometimes they used a clever engineering design similar to what survivalists now call a Dakota fire pit. This is a system with an underground channel dug from the edge of the teepee to the center of the fire pit to supply fresh air. Cold air flowed through the pipe directly to the base of the flame, which significantly increased the draft. This air supply worked like a blacksmith's bellows, causing the fire to burn hotter and brighter. At the same time, the smoke rose straight up without filling the living space with smoke. This method of air supply allowed the fuel to burn almost completely, leaving behind a minimum of ash and waste. This was especially important on the plains when using dried bison dung, which was the main fuel. Unlike firewood, dung required a very good supply of oxygen for even burning without acrid smoke. Fuel economy was critical, as there were few trees on the plains. Efficient combustion meant that women had to expend less energy gathering fuel. At night, the coals in the hearth were carefully covered with a layer of ash to limit air access. In this preserved state, they smoldered slowly until morning, maintaining a heat core. In the morning, the hostess only had to fan these hidden coals and throw in some dry kindling. The fire flared up again in a matter of seconds, eliminating the need to start it from scratch. This saved energy and time, especially in those days when obtaining fire was a laborious process. The main living area was created around the hearth. Here they cooked, ate, sewed clothes, and told stories on long winter evenings. The ground around the fire gradually dried out and warmed up deeply, becoming the warmest place in the house. Children and the elderly always took places closer to this source of heat. The light from the fire was the only illumination that created comfort in the small world of the teepee in the middle of the snowy desert. To boil water, they often used hot stones, which they took from the fire with tongs and threw directly into containers. Water in leather bags or wooden bowls boiled almost instantly upon contact with the stone. This method allowed hot food to be cooked without placing the dishes on an open fire, which preserved valuable utensils. Leather and wood could not withstand direct flames, but they coped well with stone boiling. The cooled stones were removed, reheated, and the process was repeated. The smoke from the hearth was also put to good use and was used to preserve food hung under the dome of the dwelling. Strips of meat suspended high above the head were constantly blown by warm smoke. The smoking of meat took place in parallel with the heating of the room, which saved fuel. The smoke repelled insects and created a protective film on the food, extending its shelf life by months. Everything in the teepee was interconnected and served several purposes at once. Controlling the fire was entrusted only to experienced people, usually women, the rightful mistresses of the teepee. They knew how to stack wood or dung so as to get maximum heat without excessive smoke and sparks. Women knew the character of each type of wood, which ones gave off heat and which ones only smoked. The comfort and health of the entire family during the winter depended on their skill. Fire was a living thing that demanded respect, care, and constant attention. In the forested regions of the Northeast, where the climate was humid and the forest dense, The approach to construction and heating differed from that of the plains. Peoples such as the Iroquois and Huron built huge permanent dwellings called longhouses. These were the apartment complexes of their day, designed to last for many years. The sturdy arched frame was made of flexible young trees that were dug into the ground and tied together at the top. This skeleton was covered with large sheets of thick elm or cedar bark, laid like shingles. The bark itself was an excellent natural insulator, protecting against rain and wind. But in winter, the walls required additional insulation to keep the precious heat inside. All the gaps between the sheets of bark were carefully caulked with moss, wet clay, and bundles of dry grass. This created an airtight structure that was impervious to icy drafts. Such a house resembled a thermos, where the outer shell reliably preserved the internal microclimate. Inside such a house, up to 100 meters long, lived several related families belonging to the same clan. It was like a dormitory, where all life took place in full view of relatives. This gigantic space was heated by a series of fires arranged in a chain along the central passageway. The fire burned constantly, creating a thermal corridor through the entire building. The architecture of the house was subordinated to the idea of collective survival. Each fire served two families, living on either side of it in their own compartments. This allowed for significant savings in firewood by combining efforts to maintain heat and cook food. Women from the two families took turns watching the fire, allowing the others to rest. This proximity strengthened social ties and ensured that the fire would never go out due to negligence. Mutual assistance was the basis of life in the longhouse. Smoke escaped through special square openings in the roof, located directly above each hearth. The uniqueness of the design lay in the fact that these hatches could be adjusted. The inhabitants used long poles to move pieces of bark on the roof, closing or opening the openings depending on the wind. During heavy snowfall, the hatch was covered, leaving only a narrow gap for draft. This allowed them to keep warm without suffocating from the smoke. Along the walls, wide bunks were arranged in two tiers, raised about half a meter above the ground. People slept on these platforms, covered with skins and mats, away from the cold drafts below. Physics worked in their favor. Cold air accumulated near the earthen floor, while warm air rose to the sleeping areas. The upper shelves were often used for storage or as additional sleeping places for young people. Sleeping on a raised platform was much warmer and safer for health. The space under the lower bunks was used wisely. It was used to store firewood. This solution had a double benefit. The wood did not block the passageway and was additionally dried before burning. The heat from the fires and people's breath drew excess moisture out of the wood. Dry firewood produced more heat and significantly less acrid smoke, which was critical in a closed space. In addition, there was no need to run outside in a blizzard every time fuel was needed. The longhouse was always crowded, and the mere presence of many people contributed to the heating. 50 to 100 people could live in one house at a time. The bodies of people and dogs acted as living batteries, continuously giving off heat and maintaining the temperature in the enclosed space. Even in the most severe frosts, the temperature inside remained above zero, thanks to this biological heating. Collectivism literally warmed the Iroquois. The entrance doors at the ends of the house were covered with heavy bear or bison skins. Often double curtains were made, creating a kind of vestibule to block out the cold air. This system of airlocks allowed people to enter and leave the house without cooling down the huge space. A person would first enter the vestibule, close the outer skin behind them, and only then open the inner one. This maintained a stable temperature inside even when people were moving around actively. The earthen floor in a longhouse was often covered with a thick layer of fir or spruce branches. This forest-scented flooring served as excellent insulation from the cold, frozen ground. The branches created an air layer that could be walked on without feeling the cold underfoot. This flooring was regularly replaced with fresh branches, maintaining cleanliness and a pleasant pine scent that overpowered the smell of smoke. Nature provided materials for flooring that were warm and hygienic. Collective living made it possible to cope more effectively with the harsh winters of the eastern forests. In addition to physical warmth, it was necessary to maintain warmth of the soul in order to survive, which often proved to be no less difficult a task. Isolation, darkness, and constant cold weighed on the psyche, creating an invisible but deadly threat. The The long winter months, when outdoor activity was limited by blizzards, could cause deep depression and outbreaks of aggression. People understood that despondency weakened the body and made it vulnerable to disease. Therefore, social life in winter was not just entertainment, but a strictly regulated necessity. In the confined space of a teepee or longhouse, conflicts could flare up instantly, so etiquette and rules of conduct were strictly observed. Winter was traditionally a time for telling stories and legends, and passing on knowledge to the younger generation. There was a belief that many sacred myths could only be told when there was snow on the ground. The elders, the keepers of wisdom, would sit by the warm hearth for hours telling stories about the creation of the world and the exploits of their ancestors. It was a living library in school where children absorbed the culture of their people. While the stories were being told, people's hands were not idle. Adults were busy making and repairing clothes, weapons, and tools in preparation for the spring hunting season. Women decorated items with intricate embroidery made from porcupine quills or beads, putting their heart and soul into every stitch. This painstaking, monotonous activity kept their hands busy and calmed their minds, acting as a kind of meditation. The beauty of the patterns reminded people that there was more to the world than white snow and gray rocks. In winter camps, noisy games and competitions were also organized, as far as possible in the limited space of the dwellings. Gambling with dice or guessing objects in the hands was incredibly popular among adult men and women. These gatherings were often accompanied by singing, rhythmic drumming, and laughter. The excitement made the blood rush faster and allowed people to release pent-up emotional tension. Winning or losing became the main topic of discussion for the next few days. Fathers and grandfathers made toys for children from scraps of leather and wood, involving them in the learning process through play. Small bows, dolls, and miniature models of tipis helped children master adult skills in a safe environment. The laughter and joy of children were considered the best cure for winter blues and fear of the raging elements. If children laughed in the camp, it meant that the spirits were favorable to the tribe. Adults did everything they could to ensure that childhood continued even in the middle of the icy desert. An important cultural element was the keeping of so-called winter counts, chronicles drawn on animal skins. For the Plains Indians, it was winter, not summer, that was the measure of time passed. Each winter was given a unique name based on the main event, which was recorded with a schematic drawing. The chronicler would unfold the skin and, pointing to the drawing, remind the community of its history year after year. This gave people a sense of continuity of life and connection to the past. Shamans and healers performed regular rituals to maintain the spirit and health of the community. To the sounds of tambourines and chants, they appealed to the spirits for mild weather and good fortune. Belief in the protection of higher powers gave people confidence that the sun would return and spring would surely come. These rituals united people, reminding them that they were not alone in the face of the universe. Spiritual protection was considered as important as the strong walls of a dwelling. Hospitality was an unbreakable law at this time. Any traveler could count on warmth and food in any tipi. To refuse a guest meant bringing shame on the whole family and misfortune on the camp. People often visited each other, even within the camp, to dispel boredom and exchange news. Mutual assistance was the basis of survival, as it was almost impossible to survive the harsh winter alone. Thus, in the warmth of hearths and human communication, through work and games, the darkest and coldest months of the year passed. We have seen that building a warm camp without trees is not magic, but precise calculation and knowledge of nature. Native Americans created a unique civilization capable of thriving in extreme conditions. Their technologies, tipis, pemmican, layered clothing, are masterpieces of functional design. They did not fight the environment, but became part of it, using the wind, snow, and landscape to their advantage. This knowledge, accumulated over centuries, is now respected by engineers and survival experts. It reminds us that comfort can be created even from nothing, if you apply your mind and ingenuity. Which Native American technology did you find most ingenious? The construction of a teepee or the use of snow as insulation? Or perhaps you were surprised by the composition of pemmican? Write your opinion in the comments, suggest topics for future videos on survival and history, and be sure to subscribe to the channel.